Alright everybody, and welcome back to another CSB tutorial. Today we're going to go over the difference between actors, templates, what items are, and the common component settings. So if you're already familiar with that, feel free to skip this episode. Or don't, it helps the channel grow. Speaking of helping the channel grow, if I've helped you out, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so others can find this video too. One thing that you may notice that's different than last time are these two icons at the bottom of my screen. I've had ChatGPT make a macro that quickly toggles the custom CSS editor. That's something that I do pretty frequently, so it's a big time saver on my end. If that's a macro that you think would be useful for your own workflow, it'll be uploaded to the GitHub. If not, it's not a big deal. Secondly is this little book icon, which just opens a journal that I've created that has an image of our prototype, and that way I can quickly open it within Foundry rather than navigating to the file and trying to split screen it as a weird window. With that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to start by navigating to the Actors tab and creating a new actor. I'm going to change its type to a template, and I always name my template starting with an underscore for organization reasons, and I'd advise you to do the same. I'll go ahead and name mine underscore player character. Next, let's create two more actors with the type character. I'll name mine John and Will. You're welcome to create just one if you'd like, but I'll be doing this for demonstration purposes. You'll notice that the template has a different icon than the actors, and it's pretty telling of the difference between the two. Templates act as a blueprint which the actors are created from, and if we go ahead and open our template in actors, you'll notice that the actors have a drop-down that allows us to change what template they're using. Since we only have one template, it will default correctly, so we don't have to make any changes there. On our template, you'll notice two plus signs, and we'll get into the difference between those two later. But for now, let's just go ahead and click either one of them to open the component editor window. By default, the component editor window is set to be a label, which you can tell by this top drop down here. We don't need to worry about that just yet, so let's go ahead and leave the label selected. Labels are deceptively simple at first, and we'll get into all the different uses for them later. But for right now, let's go ahead and use them at their most basic level, a way to display text that players cannot edit, which makes them great for things like section headers. In fact, if we look at our prototype, we have a lot of labels used for exactly that purpose. Let's go to the label text field and enter hi and save the component. You'll notice that our template now says hi, but neither of our character sheets do. And that's because we haven't told them to use the latest version of our template. Refreshing or reloading in Foundry doesn't actually automatically do that for you, and it's an important step. There have been a number of times when I'm making something in CSB and I make some kind of typo or error, and it usually doesn't take too long to fix, but there have been too many times when the error just keeps happening after I thought I fixed it, only for 10 minutes of me going by trying to find where a second error or typo might be before I realize I haven't reloaded my sheet to apply that fix and I'm some kind of idiot. So let's go ahead and refresh now. Fantastic. Both of our actors now say hi, just like our template. Except we really don't need that, and this was just to demonstrate adding components to our character sheet. So let's go ahead and remove that by clicking on the component in our template to open its editor, and clicking delete and confirm that. Since we did make a change to our template, we do need to refresh our actors. Except for this time, I'll go ahead and navigate to the three dots on my template and click the Reload All Character Sheets option, which will refresh both my actors for me. You can also quickly access that option by right-clicking the template in our Actors side panel. The relationship between templates and actors are exactly the same as templates and items, except item templates come with an extra handy feature called subtemplates, which acts as a sort of storage for your frequently used components or groupings. Think about how the different kinds of items like weapons, loot, or consumables all might be different enough to have their own templates, but they might have similar or repeating components like descriptions, rarities, values, or weights, each which might be in their own subtemplate, or they could potentially all share a subtemplate if they frequently go together. While we're talking about items, I want to point out early that items aren't necessarily the obvious things that come to mind. In fact, if you've played other systems in Foundry like D&D or Pathfinder, you're already familiar with this concept, even if you haven't noticed it. The best way to think about items in Foundry is anything that can be dragged and dropped onto your character sheet, including things like race, class, features, spells, conditions, and yes, weapons, loots, and other consumables. Now that we've covered the differences between templates, actors, and items, let's go back to our template and talk about those two plus signs. While both open the component editor menu, they place the component in a different spot, either our sheet's header or body. Regardless of where the component goes in your template, it'll work the same. The best way to think about the sheet's header or body are predefined folders which contain the component and influence its placement. If you place the component in the wrong spot, don't worry, you can always drag and drop it to move it somewhere else in your template, or even to another template, and if you hold control while doing so, you can create a duplicate. Speaking of sections in our template, it's a great segue into the panel component. Let's create a panel in our header by clicking the top plus sign, selecting the component type dropdown, and changing it to be a panel. Panels are just like the header and the body. They act as a way to break up your sheet into sections, and they even come with a variety of settings to change how they display their contents. One thing to note is that you can even nest panels inside of other panels to create a complex display with no funny CSS work. But while we have the panel editor open, let's talk about some of these settings, since a lot of them are going to be used in other components as well. First up is the component key, which allows us to name our component. You can call information using that name later. It's important to note that your component name does have to be unique per template, meaning I can have a key of description in multiple templates with no problem, but I can only have one description per template, even if there are different component types. For the most part, component keys are required, though you can place some components without them, such as labels or panels. Yet, you still might want to, since Custom System Builder does add component keys as classes to that component by default. And let's go ahead and do that for our panel for that exact reason, which will be helpful in a later episode. I'll key mine panel main header. Next up is the advanced configuration settings. The component tooltip will create floating text by the user's cursor on hover, which is a great way to explain nuance about your character sheet to your players without having to be visible all the time. Speaking of visibility, the next three options will allow us to decide who gets to see our component and when, which is great for sweeping the inevitable mess under the rug, so that we can continue to trick our players into believing that we're amazing developers, even though most of our sheet will be held together with duct tape and hope. Moving on, you can even use formula to conditionally change when a user gets to see certain components, though we'll need to get into formulas later. A new and desperately needed addition to Custom System Builder is a permission-based edit log for components. Previously, we had a ton of workarounds to make components safe to add to our sheets, preventing player tampering or misclicks that could ruin the entire sheet. Though I'll still go over some of the old workarounds in a later episode, just in case it fits your use case or you're using an older version. Escape HTML values in the template view was actually a request of mine, so seriously, shout out to the CSB team for that. My specific use case was I created a graph in my character sheet that needed a reference values to display properly. However, every time I'd open my template, it would try to render that graph, even though the reference values weren't present and the fallbacks just don't render properly in templates. So this caused errors to flood my console, even though the code was correct. This setting simply forces the component to display the HTML as text, at least in the template, rather than trying to render it normally. Next up, column and row spanning allows us to tell components to take up more space within panels that are set to display as grids. This allows us to have asymmetrical displays without having to break out the CSS nearly as often. Again, huge shout out to the CSB team making the system just so much more user-friendly over the years. Finally, the additional CSS class field allows us to add classes to our components. And yes, you can use the name of another component here to duplicate its styling, but we'll get more into classes and styling when we actually get into doing some CSS work. For the most part, the rest of the component fields are going to be different based on the type of component, so we'll need to get into them as we cover each component in later episodes. Let's go ahead and save our panel, and since I'm following a prototype, I'll go ahead and add the rest of the panels that I'm likely to need for the rest of the sheet. While I can do that in the background, I'll go ahead and introduce you to the tab panel component. Tab panels also help divide your sheet into sections. However, they also create buttons to help you navigate those sections and only show one at a time. Think about how you have different tabs on the top of your browser. Tab panels are a fantastic way to limit the display of information on your sheet and only show the relevant information at any given time, speeding up navigation and use. For example, you may want a combat and social tab so that users aren't having to click through their background information while they should be slapping goblins. We already covered the basics of labels at the start of this episode when we made each of our sheets say hi. So in an attempt to make our sheet not look so bare, I'm going to go ahead and add our section headers. We'll worry about styling them later. For now, they're just going to be named components with text. While it doesn't look like a lot now, we set the stage and created big sections of our sheet and labeled those sections so that we know what's going on later. In the next episode, we'll be going over text fields, number fields, and rich text areas. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.